I'm Maryn.
And I'm Christie.
And you're listening to Hung, a podcast where we talk about true crime from the court of law to the court of public opinion. So, part 2 of Russ Faria, I've been interested to talk about the 911 call. We'll put in the 911 recording here, so you guys take a listen, and then we'll join back up and talk about our impressions of the call.
County 911, what is the location of your emergency? Okay, ma'am. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, I need you to take a couple deep breaths so I can see what's going on. What is the address where you need this to come?
What?
Okay, what is the telephone number you're calling from in case we get disconnected?
I don't know this number. I know my cell phone number.
Okay, what is that number? Okay, who am I speaking with?
My name is Russ Faria.
Russell, what's going on there?
I just got home from a friend's house, and my wife killed herself. He's on the phone.
Okay, Russell, I need you to calm down, honey, okay? I need you to calm down, take a couple deep breaths. We're going to get somebody on the way there, okay? What did she do? Do you know? Okay, calm down, honey. Is she breathing at all?
No.
She is not breathing? Okay. Russell, is there anybody that we can call for you?
No, my mom.
Okay, Russell, take a couple deep breaths, hon, okay? Okay, what is your mom's name?
Lucy.
I'm sorry, I can't understand you, hon.
Lucy.
Lucy? And what's her last name?
Faria.
How old is your wife?
She's 42.
32?
42.
42? Okay, and you're for sure she's not breathing right now?
No, she's dead.
Okay. Russell, how long were you gone today?
I left around 5. I just got back. But she was at her mom's, and her friend was bringing her home. So I don't know what time she got home.
And you said that, has she been depressed lately?
She got cancer.
She is, but she does have cancer?
Yeah.
Russell, where's the knife now? I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said, hon. It's laying right next to her? It's in her neck? Okay.
Oh my God. I wish you do this to me. I wish you do this.
Russell, they're on the way, hon, okay? They'll be there shortly. Is there anybody else there in the house with you?
No. There's nobody else here.
Was she on any medication? Okay, can you do me a favor? What I need you to do is I need you to get those medications for the paramedics, okay?
I think they're here on the table.
Yeah, we have everybody coming to you, okay? But what I need you to do is take a couple deep breaths and try to get her medication together, okay? Russell? Where are her medications?
I think they're on the table.
They're on the table? Okay, where?
I think these are it.
Okay, where is she in the house? In the living room? Okay. Where are you right now? Okay.
My God. Oh my God. What am I gonna do? Oh my God. God. Oh.
What is her name?
Her name is Betsy.
Betsy?
Yes. Betsy. No. Oh my God, no.
No, her friend dropped. She went to her friend's house.
She was at her mom's.
At her mom's house. Her friend dropped.
And his friend was going to bring her home from her mom's house.
Russell, I have a couple officers that are out there right now. Can you do me a favor and open your front door?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's unlocked. It's unlocked.
Okay, can you go meet him at the door?
It's unlocked.
Russell, are the officers inside with you now?
Oh my God.
Okay, well, good luck to you, honey. I'm going to go ahead and hang up, and we're going to try to call your mom, okay? All right. Bye-bye.
I mean, it's always hard with 911 calls. I've heard people who are more familiar with 911 calls and whatever, like legal and investigative side of things, say that there have been people who sounded really genuine on 911 calls that ended up being guilty, and people who sounded not very concerned or what you would think somebody should sound and or were innocent of anything. Right. It's hard to know what can I really take from this. I think that it gives context for listening to the witness's testimony. She has a lot of experience. She's the director of the 911 call center, and she's been doing this for 14 years, and she's taken thousands of calls. And so this is her opinion about what she's hearing on the call. I do want to say that's really a hard call to listen to. When the prosecutor gets up to question the witness, she asks her about having experience with someone who's being hysterical. And she says that it's really hard to get information from people who are in hysteria, that they just are having trouble breathing, having trouble giving responses. And in this call, there would be hysteria, but then he was able to stop and give answers and then go back to the hysteria, what she felt like was not what she's used to hearing on these calls. So she felt like it was different. Sometimes I felt like he was kind of taking his mouth away from the phone, like when he wasn't answering and he was crying or doing whatever. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it's just the phone call wasn't picking up some of that. It's hard to know, like, was he playing up what he was saying in his emotion, or was he really having a hard time getting out what he was trying to say, and he was doing a lot of repetition of words and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I don't know how to read it. Yeah. I have to say, well, she is an expert. And so I'm going to say, okay, from her position, she feels like this was abnormal compared to what she usually hears. And she could be incorrect in her assessment, but just have to continue listening to the rest of the evidence and not base too much around that unless it ends up being the key to it all. Which, if it is, it's not a very good key, right? Right. When you know that people can respond in such different ways to grief or shock, it's interesting, but I don't feel like it's something that you can really, like, put a lot of stock in, right? Like you were saying earlier, assessments can be wrong. They can sound really convincing or really
unconvincing, and it turns out definitively that they did do it or they didn't do it, and you got it wrong.
This is super different, but I don't know how many times as a kid something's broken, something got left out. Maryn, did you do that? I can't not smile, but there were many times where I didn't actually do it, but like it's the...
Yeah, but I was like, you look guilty. I don't
Right.
believe you. And I'm sure that would be really hard as a kid to be like, but I'm telling the truth, but you don't believe me.
I mean, it is definitely a sign of somebody being dishonest or not telling the truth, but I couldn't stop myself. Well, I have to look like I definitely didn't do it because I did, but then it's like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not smiling. I don't know. Obviously, this is super different. He wasn't doing, well, I guess I was going to say he wasn't doing anything where he was thinking that he was being scrutinized or going to be picked apart, but maybe he did. If he did it, right, then he's got to act believable. So,
right, which I would say is the argument for what she's saying is that he was putting on a show, and that though parts of it seemed convincing, there were other aspects of it that didn't quite fit, that showed, in her opinion, that this was acting and not real because it didn't follow the standard of how it should have sounded or how she's used to it sounding.
Well, all I can say without it necessarily meaning anything is what it sounds like to me. And we've heard some, like Casey Anthony, right? She doesn't sound all that concerned in her 911 call. And man, I can just imagine being in this scenario, or imagine him being in this scenario, and it sounds pretty heartbreaking.
Yeah.
To me. It can be acting, it can be regret, it could be whatever, but
yeah,
it was pretty hard to listen to for sure. It was interesting to me that she didn't even suggest any sort of life-saving at all. You know, we had a different one where there was a knife in the neck and they're like, do CPR. So
right.
She's just like, oh, she's not breathing. Okay.
Yeah.
Like,
right. Didn't try and get him to start
to stop
mouth to
bleeding
mouth or compressions or anything like that. So yeah, that is interesting. Why would she do something differently?
Right.
I don't know. Yeah, that is interesting. But the defense, when they got up to cross-examine her, they have her look at the time the call came in. They're saying that he couldn't have gotten home earlier than 9:38, and this call came in at 9:40, so it would have been like right after he found her, or it would have been right after his plan came together, and then he times it so that it's as if he just found her and called. So I don't know, but he points out that in dispatchers training, they're trained to calm people down, get them breathing, get them to answer questions. It's almost like saying, because a dispatcher was good at their job and able to get someone to calm down enough to give answers, then that looks suspicious for the caller. So it can't be that the dispatcher did a good job. It has to be that the person calling is not being genuine or whatever.
Right. He's faking his emotion. And
so he asked her, how many calls have you taken from Mr. Faria? And she says, me personally, none. And then this is like one of those that if you don't know the answer to the question, don't ask the question. He says, how many involving a wife who's diagnosed with terminal cancer with a husband who has found her dead after coming home? And she says one, which is not this one. It's a different one, you know, and the prosecution objects for facts not in evidence. And she continues recently, though. And then it goes back and forth between the defense and the prosecution.
whether she can talk about that.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is the defense says something, the prosecution says something, the defense says something else. And then the prosecution says, are you arguing with me? And the defense says, yes, I am. You know, so that's one example of them getting kind of spicy with each other, not just with their argument. And the judge overruled the objection and said she could answer. And she had taken a call recently from a caller whose wife was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he came home and found her dead. But she didn't, you know, then what? Like, he sounded different than Russ, or he sounded the same as Russ. It was just, she had taken a call like that.
Right. Well, and I mean, if you're trying to say how many times have you experienced something exactly like this, well, it would have to be even more. Like, but she was actually murdered, but he said she committed suicide. How many times have you had a call like that? Like,
right.
Because if she had terminal cancer and she died of
Right, she just died
cancer.
but wasn't killed. Right.
Right, like that's going to be very different. And
right. And it wouldn't
less
be
traumatic
surprising to come home and find your terminally ill wife had passed away while you were gone. But if she was stabbed 56 times, then, maybe you can compare the two. But
right.
yeah,
it's just
so
silly.
he just goes back and was like, okay, so you said this is odd. This is an odd audio. Yes. But that was pretty much it. So, and then we have the first officer that arrived on the scene. He enters, looks over, sees Betsy on the floor and Russ standing kind of near her head area, and immediately says, you gotta leave the residence. He brings him outside to the front porch, and Russ sits down on a chair out there on the patio. And the prosecutor says, was there any point in time when you saw Betsy Faria laying on the ground that you thought it was a suicide? And he says, no, ma'am. Not even a split second? No, ma'am. So it was immediately evident to him that something was wrong and that this was not a suicide. They enter the black t-shirt into evidence, and then goes back to him being on the front porch with Russ. Russ was kind of hyperventilating. He was worried about him going into shock. The paramedics get him a blanket, and the officer invited him to go sit in the back of the police car so that he could be warm because it was pretty cold outside. He wanted to smoke a cigarette first. He wanted to go inside to get his cigarettes, and he said, no, just smoke one of mine. So he gave him one of his cigarettes, and then they went and got into the patrol car. The officer, of course, was sitting in the front seat. Russ was sitting in the back on the passenger side, and the officer's goal was just to help keep him calm, help him to relax. And
did they too start talking about video games?
Actually, they do talk about
Really?
video games. Kind of. They talk about arcade games, but not video games.
You could be like, whoa, he's talking about arcade games. That's, like Colin Griffith too, right? He's trying to calm him down. The police officer is bringing up these subjects, right?
Right. Yeah. They both grew up in towns kind of close to each other. And so the officer was just talking about different hangout areas over there. And he brought up Bobblehead Road. And Russ said, quote, he used to take women out there and scare the hell out of them. And the officer says when Russ was telling him about that, he was calm and he was laughing and jovial and whatever, and seemed like not a care in the world. His wife isn't laying dead on the floor in the house.
Right.
And the only time the officer said that he got emotional again was when he mentioned telling his mom and his daughters about the incident. Otherwise, he seemed normal and even jovial. So I think that's one of those things that, I don't know. I just don't know how much stock you can put in that. And that's what pretty much the defense attorney brings out is, well, when you went in, were you able to actually see the stabs on her torso? And he says, no. Well, you said you thought he was going into shock and you were worried about that and he was hyperventilating. Your goal was to calm him down and, hey, guess what? You're good at your job. And that's why he was able to calm him down and help him to not focus on those things. And then the defense goes into, well, did you know his wife had terminal cancer? And like, were you there? Were you there through those 2 years that she was suffering and they were dealing with that and he was grieving this and that? And then she got re-diagnosed 2 months earlier, and you don't know how much grieving he's done and how much he's prepared himself for his wife to die. So maybe he's responding differently for those reasons.
Right.
Which, I don't know. Does it even matter how much you're grieving because your wife might die of cancer? You weren't grieving or processing her committing suicide and killing herself. So I don't know. I'm not sure that they really are all that related to each other in his response.
It feels almost like a non-question. It doesn't matter, and it doesn't make what he saw irrelevant, right? It's like, yes, we all understand. Now, it's fine to, I think, bring up, well, people can have different responses, and he had a different background than maybe your average Joe. But to specifically ask questions like, were you there, police officer, those 2 long years of suffering? Like, No.
Right.
Does it mean that he can't be an expert witness? That would be true of any case he ever worked. He wouldn't have been there until the thing happened.
Right. And I think it is one of those situations where it's saying, well, based on my experience, this seemed a little different. Does it mean something necessarily? Maybe, maybe not. But they're still sharing, well, here was my impression. And then you decide how much weight to give it based on everything else that you hear.
I still think it's okay and fair for the defense to bring up, well, keep in mind, basically for the jury, right, that it could be different than a normal situation because of all of these things. But to ask it in that way is weird. You can't possibly have anything of value here because of this. And it's like,
right.
Well, that's not true.
Right. Because this is one person, one call, and it could be an outlier.
Right. And
which is always true.
Is always true. And then no expert could ever be an expert. So it's just like, it's silly.
Right.
And it's not effective. I mean, you're the 13th juror over here, so I don't know, you can speak to how effective it is for you, but it wouldn't feel effective for me. How effective it is as a defense strategy to ask questions like that in that way. Is that effective for you?
No, because I think it's like, duh. You know, like, I mean, it's obvious that of course they didn't know him. Of course they've never responded to him. Of course they haven't been there through this stuff.
I respond better to, I'm showing you by the evidence or lack thereof, and not in an accusatory or weird way like that.
Right.
I don't like it.
Well, and it feels like everyone knows what the answer is. Maybe don't ask an obvious answer type of thing. Ask it more in a curiosity way that you're like, well, have you found that sometimes people don't react like you would expect?
Because I think most people could be like, yeah, I think that that's possible. Especially because it's like, okay, so you think Russ is the only exception here? Like,
right.
Instead of there can be exceptions and maybe Russ is one of them.
So the thing that the defense attorney ends with, I think it's actually 2 different pictures of the scene where the entry is compared to Betsy's body, where he entered and how far in he had to come before he saw Betsy's body. And what about this opening over here? Do you know if that goes to the garage? He didn't know. Basically trying to show that it's possible that Russ couldn't see Betsy until he got further into the room. And that will come into play when it comes to him laying his coat over the chair and things like that. Would you do that if you came in to find your wife on the floor dead? Well, could he have done that stuff and he hasn't seen her yet? And then he sees her. So they review the pictures of that. And seems like maybe that would have been true. Maybe he would have had to walk a little bit further in before he would have seen Betsy's body.
Mm-hmm.
And then the prosecution comes up and enters Betsy's, quote, pants and shorts. I don't know what that means. Are they... Pants
or
and shorts? Like, is she wearing pants with shorts over them? Is she wearing pants with shorts under them? Is she wearing shorts, but they're like, pants that are, they're short pants? I'm not sure what.
Is this a British version of underwear? Like, I think this is
like
pants for
boxers.
Underwear, pants and shorts.
Yeah, so that's weird. And I don't know why she waited until recross to go up there and enter the pants into evidence, and that's really all she did. But he just had that about an hour with coming and finding him and then the time in the back of the police car before he moves on to other people. And he has no more engagement with Russ in this case. The lead medic, he shared kind of some similar types of things, like walking in and immediately saying, this is not a suicide.
Which, if you're getting information from the dispatcher and they're saying, hey, we've got a woman who's committed suicide, her husband's just called in. I mean, understandable to walk in and be like, whoa, I don't know how anybody thought that was a suicide. That sounds suspicious.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's pretty quickly says, like, all right, we need to not contaminate the scene. This is a crime scene. And the prosecutor asks, well, why? And he says, well, she's got a knife stuck in her neck. He's responded to suicides and even suicides with blades, but he's never seen anyone commit suicide, quote, by putting a knife all the way into their neck.
Mm-hmm.
Which, yeah, agreed. That would be strange.
Yeah.
He said it was clear that, yeah, there was nothing that they could do for her.
Mm-hmm.
So they just cleared the scene and left it for crime scene and the detectives to work with from there.
Right. So the lead medic, so like paramedic type of thing versus not like the medical examiner. So he's
Right.
like, well, my job is done here. I can't
Yep.
save her. So let's move out.
Yeah, definitely. So the defense attorney, he's pointing out, okay, well, how many years of experience do you have? He had been on the job in his current position for 15 years, but then he also had 10 years of prior experience somewhere else. And so he'd had a total of 25 years of experience. And of course, Russ has not had any experience like that. So it makes sense that he could quickly assess the situation and see, yeah, no, not suicide, and get them out of there, where Russ has zero experience and he might not be able to tell that immediately.
Because he's basing this off of all of the suicides he's responded to and said, yeah, I've never seen one like that. If there had been one, a crazy one where he had seen that, maybe he would have been like, oh, I don't know. I've only seen this one time, but I was expecting him to say something along the lines of, well, how many times have you responded to Russ Faria's house for a suicide? Like,
oh, dude, move on. Right.
Mm-hmm.
He does go over and touch her arm to see temperature and stiffness. And he says that she was cold and stiff. He notes a lot of blood pooled on the carpet around her head, and that it was already dried and coagulated, and that indicated to him that she had been down for quite a while. One of the things that the state brought up in their opening statement was the fact that Russ didn't have any blood on him whatsoever, and that Russ had stated that he laid down next to Betsy on the floor when he found her and laid there for a minute looking at her. that seems a little creepy. Before he called 911. And they're like, well, he didn't get any blood on him. He laid right next to her. The defense is picking that apart, that is significant because, well, you got down next to her. Did you get any blood on you? And he says no. And he touched her body briefly, which I think Russ said he never did touch her. And did you get any blood on you when you did that? And the condition of the blood was dried and coagulated. So it might be actually more likely that if you got down on the floor next to her that you wouldn't get blood transfer because the blood was already dry.
If he killed her, then they would have to be proposing that he changed or something because of the amount of blood that was there. So
right. Yep, for sure. And one of the other things that he mentions is the minimal blood from her arm wounds that everybody is noting. There wasn't a lot of bleeding, so this had to have happened after she was already dead, which I'm kind of grateful for. It's good to know that she probably died pretty quickly and those other wounds were inflicted after the fact, because it would be pretty terrible to suffer those wounds and be conscious.
I imagine the majority of those stabs had to have been after she died too. Well, I would hope so, I guess, but at some point one of them has to have killed her. Close enough, probably all in the same time frame that you probably wouldn't be able to tell which ones were first, which one caused it, and which ones were shortly after.
Yeah. When the defense asked about him going over to the body, he described it as the medic sat down next to her. And when the prosecution gets back up, the prosecutor clarifies the position that he took next to the body and says, I mean, you didn't get down on your hands and knees, did you? No, I knelt down. And they clarify again, saying, knelt down meaning you just bent over her. And he says, yeah, I just bent over and touched her. So really, I don't know. It's like, is he remembering correctly? Because he's kind of saying different things. Knelt down. Did he really kneel down, or he just crouched down?
Sitting down seems like a weird thing to do.
Yeah, so. You wouldn't. Right. So, yeah. And he didn't pick up her arm or anything to test for rigor. He just touched her briefly, felt like she was cold. She felt solid, is how he describes it. But then the prosecution brings up that, well, she's right there by the front door. The front door is standing open. It's cold outside. Couldn't that have impacted the feel of her skin temperature if she'd had that cold air on her body? Like maybe any of us, even if we were alive, laying on the floor and having that cold air, maybe our skin would have also felt cold to the touch.
I guess they want the time of death to be closer to when he maybe was home.
I think so. I think they're trying to say that
maybe she wasn't dead as long as they think she was.
Right. That, yeah.
It's hard. The longer she was dead, the harder it is to prove for them that he could have been home when it happened, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know that it makes a difference because the earliest she could have died was after Pam left, or Pam did the attacking, right? I mean, that's pretty much it. So the earliest that it would have been, we say she was not answering calls from Leah, and that was at 7:21, the first one. So you say, okay, well, or let's say 7:04, because that's the last time she talks to anyone outside of Pam. Mm-hmm. So 7:04, that's the earliest she could have been attacked and died. Right. And that is 2.5 hours before Russ gets home. And 2 hours before he gets home is consistent with the beginning of rigor and the condition of the blood being kind of coagulated and dried. So to me, it fits with she died around 7:30.
Sure.
Sometime.
But I'm just wondering, like, why does it matter to the prosecution?
I don't know, because I think based on Russ's alibis and when the receipts were and when the surveillance video was, he could have been home by 6:30. So it really doesn't matter.
Right.
So why are you saying that, well, maybe he killed her right before he called 911? That wouldn't make sense. I don't know. It just is kind of weird. Sometimes I'm like, I just don't quite understand where you're going here and why that is important to you. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that is the end of that testimony. And then we move on to the lieutenant with the major case squad. And this just made me laugh because the prosecution wants the lieutenant to introduce himself and what the major case squad is. And the witness starts out by saying, without getting too much in detail about it, and then he goes on for 3.5 pages describing what the major case squad is. And I was like, that sounds like someone I know.
You?
Correct. Yeah. I was like, well, briefly. And then, I end up describing it way more, but it just made me laugh. And then he ends with, I hope that wasn't too long. And the prosecution says it was perfect. And I was laughing out loud for real. I was actually laughing.
That's funny.
Oh gosh, but I get it. So basically he says that the major case squad is made up of officers and maybe even crime scene techs and things like that from around 10 counties in the area. And so when a event like this happens,
a major case?
A major case, yes. When a major case occurs, they pull in these officers from all over to help them run down leads as soon as possible so that those leads don't disappear. So they may have 30 to 50 officers that are actually working the case, but usually they only do it for 3 to 5 days. Okay, here's the data that we gathered. And then the host agency continues on and does whatever else with the case.
Gotcha.
Yeah. In 3.5 pages. That's, what I gathered.
Well, you did good.
Yeah, that was pretty brief. Let me see if I can go on a little longer. Okay. So he ends with, in this case, Russ was arrested before the major case squad was disbanded. So that's pretty quick. They didn't say what date it was and exactly how many days they helped on this case because it can get extended if they need it, but that no warrants were issued. And then the prosecution ends with that and goes and sits down. And of course, the defense, that's what they're going to lead with because you've just left it hanging, but no warrants were issued. And that's the end of the statement. And so you come up and say, okay, well, what does it mean that warrants weren't issued? And he says, well, you have a certain amount of time after you've arrested somebody before the individual has to be released from custody. So they didn't feel like they had enough evidence to sustain a warrant at that time.
Okay, but obviously one had to have been given after the fact.
Yeah, at some point, but it seems like they arrested him pretty quickly, but didn't yet have enough evidence to support that. And then later they felt like they gathered enough evidence to convince a judge to sign off on an arrest warrant.
Okay.
So,
Man, judges do lots of things you wouldn't think of them doing. Have to decide if there's enough evidence to even arrest someone.
yep. So the defense kind of goes down the road of, you had a lot of leads. Don't you agree that it's important not to dismiss certain leads or possibilities without thorough consideration? Seems to be implying that the team had tunnel vision when it came to Russ and deciding that it must have been Russ, and therefore they overlooked or discounted other things that might have pointed in a different direction, which that definitely can happen. And the defense attorney says, the more information you have, the less chance of making a mistake and arresting the wrong person, correct? Sure. And you wouldn't want to make a mistake and arrest the wrong person, would you? No. So obviously suggesting that you arrested the wrong person here.
Well, you just did.
Yeah, because you didn't get enough information. But at the same time, he also points out that there were 104 leads. That seems like a lot of information.
It's a lot of leads.
Of course, the lieutenant is assigning the tasks. He's not actually performing the tasks, right? But they did meet twice a day, morning and night, to report back on, hey, here's what we found. So everyone's kind of on the same page and knows what the other information was. But the defense attorney brings up that Russ was interviewed and re-interviewed, that when they sent out officers to confirm or disprove Russ's story, that they were able to find receipts, they were able to find video of him. They went and talked to Russ's 4 friends who he claims he was with that night, and they even interviewed the friend who they said couldn't come that night, which is why they didn't play the role-playing game, because Richard had to work because of the holiday. And then they even talked to Richard's boss to verify that Richard was actually working, and that was a legitimate story.
Okay.
So Richard did it? No, he was working. Yeah.
I mean, I guess that shows that they kind of followed another lead to its end.
I think maybe you can also say you were overly focused on this idea that these friends aren't telling the truth, and you don't even buy their story that this other guy had to work, and that's why you weren't playing the game and you did something else. But I mean, I think it's appropriate that they verified every aspect of the story. So, but he says, as far as you recall, there were no differences in the statements by the friends and the statements by Russ. And he says, well, I didn't do those interviews myself, so you'd have to refer to those reports for more details, which seems a little bit like a cop-out, trying to, I mean, it's true, but so you're going to get every single officer that did every single thing. He does verify that Leah's alibi or her whereabouts were confirmed with the U.S. Cellular story. Leah's boyfriend, Devin, his whereabouts were confirmed by his mother. That suspect right there.
That's
you
right.
can't. Oh, yes, he was at home with me. Devin, where were you really? Yeah, so they say that they were eliminated as suspects, and the defense attorney asked, he really is on to Pam. How come nobody ever confirmed Pam Hupp's whereabouts or what clothing she was wearing?
Did they confirm everybody else's clothing?
I don't know. And then there was an objection sidebar at the bench, and then there was no further questioning in that area. But poor Pam.
Right.
Pam is getting targeted. It was Pam that killed Betsy.
Guess that's what happens if you're the last person to see somebody alive.
Yeah, for sure.
Or if you're somebody's husband.
Right. Yeah.
It's always the husband.
Yeah. The last person that saw her, or it's the spouse.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the way that the defense changes tactics, instead of talking about Pam specifically, he says, well, were there any other individuals that you confirmed their whereabouts and eliminated them from the suspect pool, basically? And he says, well, there could have been. Whatever names came up, they would have attempted to confirm their whereabouts, but he's not able to say, oh yeah, and we looked into this person and we looked into that person. But they have the whole report of, the defense attorney brought it. He's got the report of 104 leads. He could look through that and say, oh, well, you looked at this person and you looked at that person. But if there were those people, he probably isn't asking. But he could also be banking on that the lieutenant's not going to remember, and he can make it seem like they got tunnel vision and they didn't look at anybody else.
Right.
So it's hard to know.
I'm surprised they could even come up with 104 leads.
Yeah.
Do they just maybe include just like people that live in the area that have a record, or like what
Well, I don't think it's 104 people. I think it's 104 facts.
Oh.
So
Okay.
it's like, okay, here's a lead. We need to go to this place and you need to check on that place. Not necessarily related to people, but related to details.
Okay.
Yeah. And the defense attorney is saying, well, isn't it lucky when you can get video and receipt confirmation of someone's story? And he says, well, that could be helpful. Yes. So it's like, okay, well, lucky or intentional, right? That's the difference between the prosecution's theory and the defense's theory is one, it was intentional and planned out, and he got on video and got receipts so that it could provide an alibi for him. And the defense is saying, well, he got lucky that he happened to be on video and he happened to have these receipts because otherwise he wouldn't be able to verify his story, which is also true.
Right.
And then he also says about the clothing that Russ was wearing when they came to the house and the clothes that Russ was wearing on the video, if they were the same clothes. And he doesn't know. But it does appear that he was wearing the same clothing in the videos and when the police respond to the house.
Okay.
And there's no blood on him. Okay. And then, this is the prosecution comes up and it does get a little bit dirty. Not dirty,
Like
but
they play dirty.
Yeah. And like, okay, well, when you're verifying a person's whereabouts, don't the detectives also have the opportunity to weigh out the credibility of those witnesses, just like jurors? Does that go into whether or not they essentially believe the whereabouts?
Right.
And the defense attorney does not like that. He objects because it calls for speculation on whether or not a detective believes or does not believe. And I don't think it calls for speculation. I think that's, do detectives use their judgment about how credible they find the evidence? He's not saying each individual one, did they find it credible or not? She is asking in general, would that apply? But she claims that the defense attorney opened the door as to whether or not, and he cuts her off and says, I didn't ask that, Your Honor. And she says, you asked whether or not they verified his whereabouts. He says, well, that has nothing to do with his belief. And she's told to rephrase her question. And this is the part that I think is a little bit dirty. She says, wasn't the purpose to go out and re-interview the defendant's alibi witnesses specifically to ask them to take a polygraph? And the defense attorney objects and she withdraws the question. But it's like, yeah, but they've already heard it. That does seem to indicate that they had doubts about the credibility of these stories, but I don't know. That doesn't necessarily mean the stories weren't credible, right? The defense asked about the types of tools that they would use to investigate, like video, which we know that they got, but also cell tower sites to confirm locations of his phone, and asked whether or not that had been used in this case. And he said it may have been, but he didn't have a definitive answer. And the prosecutor brings up, well, even if you did request cell site data and or other information, sometimes can't that take days, weeks, months to come back? They're only on the task force for 5 days maybe, so they wouldn't necessarily be around for the other information that they've requested to come in. So he can't really have much of an opinion beyond the little bit he saw in those first few days. And he doesn't ever express an opinion about what those things mean. He just talks about what he did and what it says. So he's pretty neutral on it.
Okay.
Then we go to the CSI tech who came and took pictures of the house and the scene. She had taken pictures all around the exterior of the house, and there was one window that looked like it could have been a forced entry where the window screen had been pried on or something, but it was determined that it wasn't a forced entry, and maybe it had been a forced entry in the past, but they didn't believe that it was a forced entry in this case.
Okay.
Or I don't know how they determined that it was old, but the prosecutor also shows the pictures of the living room next to that garage hallway. There's a chair, and Russ's coat is laid neatly over the back of the chair. There's also some shopping bags there, some Kohl's bags, a Dollar General bag with toilet paper in it. And then there's a picture of a pair of leather gloves that are laid neatly across the back of the love seat. And the prosecutor asks why she took a close-up of those gloves. And the text says because of the way that they were perfectly laid, it was unusual to me. And from the position of the coat on the chair, which was immediately upon entering, then it would be her body between the chair and the love seat, and then the gloves across the room laid neatly on the back of the love seat. Now, that would only really be meaningful if he was wearing the gloves when he was out. I think later they do believe the videos show that he was wearing gloves, but there's some disagreement on, do you see gloves in the video or not see gloves? So if he was wearing gloves, and these are said gloves.
Did they make him try it on?
Were they bloody gloves?
Did they fit?
Right. They may or may not be important. It just matters whether he took them off at the time he called 911, and then that would seem weird for them to be laid there.
Right.
So the prosecutor talks about other evidence that the tech collected or took pictures of. The blood on the light switch plate in the master bedroom appeared to be made when someone was turning the light off, and it had some potential ridge detail on it. So they did try to raise that pattern, but they have to have 8 points for identification. They didn't have that many, so they weren't able to use it for anything. And then she also finds a pair of men's slippers in the closet that were kind of tossed in there that have a dark red stain on them that looks to be blood. And then she also got hair from the dog for elimination purposes, and then paw impressions from the dog. And the defense comes up and pulls out pictures of the living room. And besides the gloves, he's like, well, what else do you see on this couch or this love seat where those gloves are? Well, there's an Afghan laid across the back, and there's 2 throw pillows sitting there that look to be placed. They don't look disturbed, as if there was some sort of altercation involving that area. And also there's an ottoman that has a piece of paper on it that also doesn't look to be disturbed, which I don't think they're claiming that the gloves and the coat equal altercation. They're saying the gloves and the coat equal weird lack of concern if you would just walk past the body and set him down. But he brings up the picture again of that switch plate and says, well, look at that pattern. Do you see cross hatching in that pattern? And she says, possible, and that it could be consistent with fabric. So maybe it's not a fingerprint, maybe it's fabric. He's also saying, you don't know when that blood got on the slippers, do you? No. Can you tell if it's fresh or not? She says, no. And he says, well, isn't there blood not only on the top of the slippers, but also on the bottom of the slipper? And she says, yes. And did you locate any bloody footprints in the house? No. Any? No. Nothing that matches the bottom of those slippers? No. How would blood get on the bottom of them besides stepping in blood? And she answers, that's a good question.
See, that's a good question.
Yeah, that is a good question.
That's one that goes, because that's something wrong. Oh, there was blood on the bottom of his shoes. But then you hear, well, yeah, but there was no tracks that would show he was walking around. So how would it get on the bottom?
Right. It's like, well, once the blood got on there, he would have had to immediately take the shoes off before traveling anywhere else.
Before even taking one step, pretty much.
Right. Yeah. So, and then also shows a close-up of the handle of the knife, and it looks like there's a print in the blood. They think it's a palm print, but they also didn't have enough points of reference to be able to do an identification with it. I'm curious, though. It's like, well, is there anything that is clear it doesn't match with Russ? Even if you can't say, well, we can conclusively determine it was Russ. Can you rule him out or not with that and say, well, he doesn't have this or this or that? So I don't know. I wish that I had a little more information on that, because I did look at the picture of that and it did seem like there was quite a bit of detail. Now, this is we get into another big point of contention, and that is about the quote unquote paw print. So he brings this report and presents it to her and says, okay, can you read the last sentence in this paragraph? And it says, the very last attempt enhancing the visible paw print pattern on victim's pants met with negative results. He says it had no reaction, and she says correct. And that would indicate it was not blood. She says correct. Just to recap, Mrs. Faria's pants were processed. There was no blood on those. And then he says, oh, I'm sorry, the alleged paw print was not blood, and she says correct. And then the prosecution objects at that point. They actually dismiss the jury, take a break. And then when they come back, the defense attorney says, the majority of the break, weren't you conferring with the prosecution? She says she was reviewing the report regarding the Blue Star. She participated in the activities, but she was not the one who wrote the report, so she didn't recall all of the information. So I think the point of contention is, what did that sentence mean? Does the met with negative results mean it didn't react at all, like the presumptive test for blood was negative? And she's saying they were trying to draw up the paw print and make it more clear, maybe get some additional pattern where maybe there's not visible blood.
Okay.
And they weren't able to pull anything up in addition to what they saw with the naked eye. It goes back and forth with semantics. He says, well, so they applied Blue Star, which Blue Star is like luminol.
I was going to ask.
Yeah. And it did not react. And she says, it did react. Well, that's not what the report says. Well, it's saying it didn't react to what we were trying to do, not that it didn't react with the substance that we could see.
What is her source saying that it did react at all then?
I don't know. It's not really clear. And it's weird that she says it would have gone to the lab for further testing to determine if it was blood and whose blood or whatever. And she assumes it was sent to testing, and she doesn't really know what happened after that. And the redirect just leaves that alone. Doesn't come back to the paw print at all, and just brings up a picture of the knife block, because it appeared that the knife in Betsy's neck matched the knives in that knife block, and that the knives were located in the kitchen around next to the side of the fridge, and so someone would have had to go searching for them or known where they were. But you can deduce knives would be in a kitchen. So you're probably going to walk in there if you're looking for a knife.
Sure.
So I don't know that it means someone would have had to be familiar with the kitchen to be able to find the knife block. Actually, the fact that there's a knife block and it's sitting out on the counter is quite convenient, instead of being in a drawer and you're having to rifle through drawers trying to find the sharp knives.
Right. As far as like, who else could know there was a knife in there? Well, knives are usually in the kitchen. So,
Right.
And then not only that, but it's on the counter where anybody can see it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then the defense gets up and they go back to the paw print again.
Okay.
And the prosecution's like, no, I did not ask her about the paw prints during my recross, and they can only address things that were brought up by the other person in that most recent conversation, right?
Okay.
So she says, I didn't bring up the paw prints. You can't bring up. And he's like, well, you brought up the knives, and I didn't bring up the knives. And she said, yeah, you did bring up the knives. You brought up the knife in her neck. That's bringing up the knives. And so she feels like it's fair for her to talk about the knives, because he did talk about the knife that was in Betsy's neck, but he's bringing up what you brought up, that was there ever any testing that proved that the paw print was blood? I don't see anything about that.
I guess what's the relevance or the story if the paw print is blood? I don't know. Like,
that's the question that you should be asking yourself. And that is what the state is going to use to craft their story of what events happened with Russ and weave that in. But we're not going to hear more about it until the closing arguments, which I think is common in trials where they keep talking about this thing and you're like, I don't get why this is important. And then later on they say, well, this is why we think was important, but you don't necessarily understand why they think it's important at the time they're questioning it. And he goes back to, if there really was a paw print there, which they can't definitively prove it was even a paw print, maybe it was mud and not blood. If you're going to use that in your story to incriminate my client, where's the proof that this was blood? They don't seem to have it, or she doesn't seem to be able to definitively answer that. Poor thing. It's got to be hard to be testifying about something that you're like, I didn't write this report. I don't know what they were thinking when they were writing this.
And that's like, why don't they call the people who wrote the report?
I think they might, but I can't remember for sure. So the medical examiner, we're going to go through pretty quickly because we're not going to be able to talk about 56 stab wounds and what they were. We'll talk about the most important ones. Reading about them and hearing some of the locations of these wounds, like 2 kind of close in the area up by her ear, one that went through her eyelid. It's just horrible. You know, the fact that somebody is stabbing around your face, your head, your neck. There were some stabs that went through her arm completely and also pierced her torso.
Oh my gosh.
She had to have been alive for that stab wound because it did pierce her lung and cause some bleeding through her arm.
Her lung?
Yeah.
That's crazy. How long is that knife?
It's not even that long. So it must have just been the position of where it was. There was blood in her chest cavity as a result of that. So we know that she was still alive when she got those wounds.
I wonder how, if they can actually prove that those were the same stab, like the one that went through her arm and then into her body. Could they be separate events? This seems crazy that it could go all the way to your lungs.
Yeah. I mean, your lungs really aren't that deep underneath your
right,
rib
but I'm
cage.
thinking like a normal steak knife size, and she's like a bigger lady.
Some people have very thin arms and legs, and they have a little bit stockier of a torso, and so it's hard to say, but they did say that it did go through her arm and into her torso.
Crazy.
But the most important thing is that the stabs were predominantly on her left side. And there was only one stab wound that was below the waist, one to her thigh.
Okay.
So all pretty much isolated to the upper part of her body. And really to stab someone's head and face and 56 stab wounds, that's a frenzy.
Right.
That is anger. That feels personal. So
it's crazy.
I don't know. I can't imagine stabbing someone in the face and stuff. Ugh, terrible. So he does confirm that certain of these wounds had to have been post-mortem. They don't have the bleeding that you would see in a wound that was produced while she was alive. I'm not sure how many of those he believes were post-mortem versus how many were when she was alive. But at least a number of those did produce the pooling of blood in her abdominal cavity that indicates she was alive when those wounds were inflicted. And of course, he's the one that talks about how deep that cut was to her right wrist and that it would have severed through her tendons and things that she wouldn't have been able to grasp anything or really use that hand at all.
Right, which is significant since everything is in the left side. So not that anybody's saying she was doing this to herself at this point, but she wouldn't have even been able to. But it's a kind of a moot point because they determined those were post-mortem anyway. So
right.
So she could have, I guess. Because,
but no.
Yeah, she didn't. But like,
yeah,
the injury is not the reason she didn't do that.
Right.
Right. So
he said as far as the cause of death, there was the bleeding. And then there was also a stab wound to the trachea, which would have diminished her oxygen supply. So the combination of those two things is what led to her death.
How awful. You would think somebody being stabbed 56 times, you would die from some major organ being punctured,
right?
An artery, something. But to be like, no, you were just stabbed so many times that you bled out and you kind of suffocated to death too because your trachea was hit. Like,
yeah. It's terrible, but he does bring up that full rigor 6 to 12 hours after death, but approximately 2 to 4 hours is when it typically starts to set in. So that would have been pretty close to the 2-hour mark when that medic pokes her arm. So it could have been starting to set in if she died 7:30. But then he brings up cadaveric spasm. And this is it goes back to, could she have been cold because the door was open? Could she have been stiff because of cadaveric spasm? And that's when, like, if you've been involved in a major struggle and you're expending ATP. ATP is what your muscles need to fire.
Okay.
Right? So if you have been struggling with your attacker and you're expending a lot of ATP because you're using up a lot of energy to fight off your attacker, then maybe rigor would set in earlier because you've already burned off some ATP. And what happens with rigor mortis has to do with ATP. So it's kind of debated whether that's a real thing or not. Some people think that it's something that happens. Others are skeptical about it. And he also said that a medical examiner might see it one time in their entire career. So I guess he's thinking maybe this was the one time.
Right.
I don't know if he thinks it was or if they're just saying, could it have been? You know, and he's just saying it's not really well accepted in the medical community, but some people believe it. Cadaveric spasm is not going to lead to the body being cold faster.
Right. Maybe just stiff faster.
Right. Or the blood being more dry.
Right.
And that was the cross-examination that they brought up, which I think were really good questions. Like, okay, well, let's say she struggled and so he actually killed her at 9 and that's why she was stiff already. And it was less than an hour later that they arrived. Maybe that's why she was stiff because she was fighting with him. But that doesn't explain why the blood was dry, why she was cold. And if they're trying to say, yeah, well, the door was standing open for the 10 minutes before the dude came in and poked her arm and that made the blood dry and that also made her cold. And I don't think that that's really an effective argument for me.
Right. It's like you can base your estimation of the time of death on multiple factors. If it was only strictly based on the stiffness of her body, it could be something else, but based on that and the dried blood and the temperature of the body, right?
So the defense is kind of going into these different wounds and how if somebody is moving around and you're stabbing them and they're relatively deep wounds. I mean, a steak knife isn't that long, but it's also plenty long for being stabbed.
Right.
But if you're thrashing around, you wouldn't expect them to be clean and even because if they're fighting, they're more likely to be ragged in some way. And saying all of these wounds here, they're so clean, doesn't that indicate that they were post-mortem? And he says either that or they were really fast.
Yeah.
He does say, well, there are these gashes in the neck and things like that, that clearly there was some struggle going on. And then the rest of them, it's hard to know. So the defense is suggesting that someone staged the scene to try and make it look like a suicide, which I'm like, are you an idiot? Because you've got to know that nobody's going to think she killed herself just because they're cut wrists. Nobody stabs themselves 55 times, slits their wrist like that, and then obviously the knife has to go in after she's slit her wrist because it's still in her neck. So it was the last thing that happened.
Right. And who would be thinking ahead enough to be like, oh, well, her husband will think it's a suicide and that'll look bad on him. It's weird. I don't know if it's actually more of a just in case, make sure she's really dead. I don't know.
Yeah. The defense asked the Emmy directly if he believes that the scene was staged. And of course, the prosecution objects to speculative, and that's sustained, so he doesn't ever answer. But I mean, there is kind of question about how many of those wounds were defensive type wounds. definitely whoever attacked her would have blood on them.
Right.
So then the prosecution, part of their story is, well, do you really know what happened leading up to the stabbing? Well, that's kind of one of the questions like the defense was asking. It's like, well, no, I don't know.
Right.
I can't tell. Could they have been fighting? All I can tell you is what's on the body. What does it take to be able to tell for sure that rigor is set in? A poke is not going to determine whether there's rigor. So you would actually have to move the body to determine if it was in rigor. And the lead medic didn't do that. And how long does it take blood to dry? Well, if it's a thin layer, it would be shorter. If it's a thick layer, it would be longer.
Mm-hmm.
And the blood around her neck, that was a pretty big pool of blood.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in carpet. Probably would take a while for it to dry.
Right.
Okay, so then the crime scene tech who actually wrote the Blue Star report, she gets on the stand, which why didn't you just ask this witness instead of asking the first one? When it says met with negative results, what does it mean? And she says, I meant enhancing it further. There was no more enhancement. What we saw is all that we could see. So that does seem to be what she was saying. And she does say the color was the same between that blood and the blood on other areas of her pants. Mm-hmm. And during cross, he goes over, they outlined areas with Sharpie where blood reacted. And he says, well, you didn't mark around the paw print blood to show that it reacted. And she said, well, I was only circling areas that reacted that were not visible to the naked eye. Like the ones that were visible, I didn't have to outline because it was obvious you could see them, which does make sense. But he's still going on about like, well, the fact that you didn't outline the paw print seems to indicate that it wasn't blood because you said that you outlined all the things that were blood. That's one of those things that I think sometimes defense attorneys try and twist the wording of things to make it seem like it means something different than what it means. Mm-hmm. She says that the area of the suspected paw print did react when they applied the Blue Star.
Okay.
So she is also the person that took pictures of the inside of the car. And there was an Arby's bag on the floor of the passenger seat that was crumpled up and tossed in there. And the receipt was stapled to the Arby's bag, and it had a timestamp on it of 9:09 p.m. He got 2 cheddar melts. That's what he got for dinner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yum. Now I want Arby's.
Yeah. And there were 2 palm prints on the sliding glass door going out to the backyard. And she did collect those palm prints, and they all matched Russ Faria. And another examiner looked at those prints independently from her, and they came to the same conclusion that they were a match to Russ Faria.
It's hard to feel like finding someone's handprints in their own house is very significant, depending on what it's on, I guess.
Right.
But if you find a handprint of somebody who doesn't live there, okay, that's significant. It's more so only significant to say, yep, it was Russ's, so it wasn't
someone else's.
Someone else.
Yeah. I feel like it's on the inside of the patio door, not on the outside.
Mm-hmm. Which I guess the outside would be more prone to like weather.
Yeah, exactly. When the prosecution gets up to redirect, they bring up that, hey, what would disturb those prints, implying that they were more likely to be fresh because they probably would have gotten smudged or smeared or disturbed in some way if they'd been there for a while. And I'm like, well, maybe the outside of the door, that would be more likely, because he says things that can disturb the print would be any weathering, extreme heat, extreme cold, wind, rain. I'm like, yeah, but inside the house, that's not really going to apply.
Yeah, or someone else opening the door and putting their hand over that print, I guess I could see. But there's no way to prove when that print was left.
Yeah, actually, the defense is the one trying to say what would disturb a print, but then it's inside the door.
Which maybe is their point. Like, nothing would have disturbed the print on the inside.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but the prosecution's like, well, if you've got a print on a door, a glass door, it's the middle of winter, it's a door that's used all the time, would you expect that print would be disturbed in a shorter period of time? And he's just like, I can't really say, because I don't know how many people there are, how often they're opening it, where they put their hands when they're opening it. There's just too many variables.
Right, their height would probably make a difference where they'd put their hand. And even if it was recent, who's to say he didn't let the dog out in the morning or something? Like,
right.
You know.
It doesn't really tell you when he opened that door, just that he opened the door. And that's actually not really in question whether or not he's ever opened that door.
Right. And does it even mean anything? I feel like the only thing that matters about it is that it's not someone else. So
right. It would be significant if there was trace blood in the handprint.
Right.
Right. And that it matched him. That would be significant.
Yeah. So the bloody mark on the light switch, that had to have been left most likely in connection with this event. A handprint that matches anyone that lives in that house could be totally unrelated.
Right.
I'm sure you could find handprints of her daughters. Are you going to accuse them of being involved? It's a lot of testimony over something that once determined that it's not a foreign print to the house.
Right.
And there's no blood in it. And it's not something that be like, it could only have been left right beforehand. It becomes, okay, and then we move on. There's nothing else to say about it.
Yeah. The state definitely does tie it into their story of their theory when they do their closing argument.
But he was wearing leather gloves that he placed on the couch. How could he have left them?
True. Maryn, you've just blown up the state's whole case.
Guess what? That's why the print's on the inside and on the outside. He opened it from the outside with the gloves on, then he took his gloves off, and then he closed the door from the...
Yeah. Yeah. So, I do agree. Like that, the whole reason you take prints for elimination of anyone who lives in the house or anyone who was on the scene, you're looking to see, do these match known contributors, right? Well, it matches a known contributor. So it may or may not be significant that it's there, but it's hard to be able to prove that it is significant if it's just the print of someone who lives in the house.
Right.
With nothing else in addition. Then
could be totally innocent, unrelated.
Yeah.
So it's just,
Yeah. That's pretty much the things that they get out of him is whether or not that palm print would be likely to be fresh or not fresh. And he says, no clue.
Yeah.
Good job. I'm glad they shouldn't have an opinion about that other than these things can interfere with, but I can't tell you how long it's been there.
Yeah, there's no part of it that can tell you if it's deteriorated, when it deteriorated, like...
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that concludes all of the evidence that was collected the evidence...
days.
Yeah, right, on that day. And then later we're going to get to the lead detective and his investigation in the house and following up with Russ's alibi and what they determined from that investigation. And then we're going to have the defense's case that puts on the friends that were there. And does this strengthen Russ's alibi or not? And what would the state's response be to this testimony that is going to undermine it?
Don't hold your breath for the defense case on the next episode.
I know, she's looking at me like, yeah, not gonna happen.
Yeah, which I think it's okay. I think that if you're here, you're listening to us, you've been listening to us, this is the amount of detail that normally goes into our cases, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
It's okay if you don't like our style and you don't like me. Like, that is totally okay because everyone has their own thing that they like. And there are going to be people out there that like the way that we do it, and there's going to be people that don't.
Right.
And that's okay.
I think it's nice for us to have the goals of, yeah, we'll cover all of this. Well, the reality is we don't want to shorten things unnecessarily because we're like, oh no, it's too long now.
Right.
Just make another part.
Yep. Yeah. And if you're still here listening to this commentary, then you must like us enough to keep listening to the very end of this very long episode. So, the people that don't like us, they're not here. They're not listening right now. So
no excuses necessary.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, thanks for coming and listening to another long-winded telling of the trial of Missouri versus Russell Faria.
Mm-hmm.
We're glad that you find us enjoyable enough to listen this far, and we hope that you will join us for our next episode.
That's right. Well, you can't leave there. You got to finish it out. There's only 7 more parts, probably. I'm just kidding.
Well, we hope. She's just kidding.
Well,
yeah, there won't.
That's
there
not the
won't
goal,
be.
but
there won't be. There might be 2 more episodes.
Yeah,
but
I think that's
mine.
I think that's a good prediction.
Yeah,
and then 1 or 2 of mine.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
This might be the first that I predict there may be 2 episodes.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm really excited to hear. I have never heard this name before. So I have
If you're leaving comments, Mom, just don't look at any comments, okay?
That's right. Yeah. I'm hands off right now. Hands off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. But you don't have to be hands off. You can get online. You can go to our Instagram, leave comments there, Hung Podcast. You can go on to our YouTube.
You can send us an email if you have a suggestion for a future case that you think fits our format. So we are always happy to find suggestions for those kinds of cases because it's not every case out there.
That's right. And if you want to just give us feedback and say, I hate your ugly noose, you can do that too. And our email for that would be hungthepodcast@gmail.com.
That's right.
Yeah. Feel free to communicate with us there. And we will hope to see you next time. Until then, I'm Christy.
I'm Maryn.
And you've been listening to Hung.